Thank you, everyone, and thank you for giving this Midwesterner a good taste of East Coast life, the aftermath of a hurricane, and the opportunity to witness a campus respond to the aftermath of a hurricane. So thank you. I don't get to witness that on ever. Never. We have tornadoes in the Midwest, for those of you. Yeah, so I'm really glad to be here. Thank you so much for allowing me to participate in the beginning of the semester. This is an exciting time, and I'm happy that you have carved out some time to really think about where you're headed as an institution. And I want to echo the president's comments about spending time identifying what is distinctive about this educational experience. And it's a lovely campus, a beautiful place. You all seem very dedicated, and the students seem like they're having a good time. And this Global Initiatives presentation certainly suggests a strength in the educational program. But I would argue that there's even more that can be done to really improve the quality of the learning experience for all students. So this is a great occasion at the beginning of an academic year to both take stock and also to look forward and to envision what a higher quality educational experience might look like for Roger Williams students and faculty. So I'm excited, as I said, to be with you here today and talk a little bit about more of those experiences. So you have a handout, a little one-page handout, and this presentation that I'm making can also be attached to any other recordings that are made or postings for this session today. And I invite you to keep thinking about these topics as the semester goes on. I hope some of the concepts resonate with you and perhaps push your thinking a little bit more about high-quality educational experiences for all students and what that might mean. So there's been no shortage of attention on what's important in higher education today. And I want to start by just reminding us of some very ambitious goals that President Obama has set out for higher education, suggesting that by 2020, America will once again have the highest proportion of college graduates in the world. We in the US did not necessarily slip in the rankings of college graduates, but other countries around the world have really raised their proportion of college graduates. So this is an ambitious goal. It requires institutions to produce more college graduates. There's no way that we can achieve this goal without helping more students get in and get through their college education. So there's some pretty ambitious goals out there for higher education that are being set nationally. And there are certainly no shortage of challenge in terms of what's expected of higher education, in terms of addressing the needs of an increasingly diverse population of students, responding to the greater demands for accountability and transparency, both in terms of cost and in terms of what students are actually learning in college. And this is all part of some really serious national criticism about higher education. And then on top of that, you know, concerns about tuition, although it sounds like the $4 million that's been invested here will certainly help with this tuition issue. So that's terrific that you were able to make that kind of investment in your students. But as I said, there's no shortage of challenge and no shortage of attention to important matters, ones that I think most of us would agree we can really get behind. Issues like improving the quality of student learning, thinking about greater and more enriched experiences for our students, and also thinking, you know, I can certainly get behind a concern about graduation rates and students that start a degree and fail to complete it. I don't think that should be happening. We should be doing everything that we can to help students get through and achieve the goals that they've set out for themselves. So there's a pretty large agenda here before us, and you know, there's, again, the issue that we've been dealing with for some time now is how to better address the increasingly diverse population of students. Now, this is not necessarily in all cases, a challenge. In some ways, addressing a more increasingly diverse population of students is an incredible asset for institutions. But it does mean we have to think about our practice and consider what are the talents, what are the issues that students are bringing into their educational programs, and how can we take maximum advantage of those opportunities and experiences. So we know a lot about student learning and success, though. So we have a lot of great information. We have terrific research about what makes for a high-quality educational experience. And now it's a matter of using that information and applying it in ways that we know work. So that's what I want to try and do a little bit this morning, is stimulate your thinking, give you some things to hang on to, and consider as you think about the work that you're about to embark on, I guess tomorrow now when you all start class with everyone. So there's some recent literature in the last several years. There's been greater attention paid to a large body of evidence suggesting that high-impact practices, and we'll talk a little bit more about what that means in a second, provide substantial educational benefit to students. That when students have these experiences that we consider high impact, that they gain even more from their educational experience. So there's a gain from the experience, but there's also a gain that seems to spread to other aspects of the educational program. So participating in high-impact experiences, in some ways, in fact, the global initiatives that were profiled just before me really are some of these kinds of high-impact experiences, purport even greater benefits. So not only is the study abroad a benefit, but it starts to spread out into other ways that the student learns and develops. So there's practices that we've identified, and actually they're flying up on the screen now, that seem to when done well, provide students significant educational advantage. And those things are, some of them you might recognize by name: learning communities, first-year seminars, high-impact study abroad experiences, applied learning experiences, community service, and community-based learning. So these are projects that we've probably all thought about in our educational practice, but maybe, we did them because we enjoyed them ourselves, or perhaps because it fit well with the educational program. But what I want to suggest is that we need to be thinking about more ways to include these experiences in all of our students' educational experience, not just for the few that figure out how to do it, or that this is an interesting service learning experience, and boy, I really enjoy working with kids in a school. No, we need to think about these experiences for all students. So that's the question I would raise to you, is one, to what extent are these kinds of practices in existence at Roger Williams? And then the second, harder question is, do most students take advantage of them? Are they able to take advantage of them? What programs, what services have we set up to make sure that students are engaging in these kinds of educational practices we know are so effective? So that's the challenge in this work. Now, I want to make sure that you know all the background on these practices and get a better sense for what these programs allow and provide for students. And they've been associated with lots of benefits, and I'll kind of go through the probably most popular ones. Oh, these high-impact practices are associated with higher persistence rates and higher grade point averages. They're also associated with what's being called deep approaches to learning, this way of getting students to engage in higher order thinking and integration and reflection on their learning in ways that get past a superficial kind of temporary knowledge and really gets into the deeper context of meaning and understanding, and is longer lasting than a superficial learning. These kinds of experiences help facilitate deep approaches to learning. They also have some other benefits. They more likely get students in the position to have high-quality interactions with faculty. They also increase important outcomes like critical thinking and writing outcomes. They also help students develop a greater appreciation for diversity, an important outcome of a college education. And they overall lead to higher engagement. So there's, again, that positive benefit that seems to spread beyond the actual experience itself. So there's a lot of really positive outcomes associated with high-impact experiences. We also have a more recent study going on, actually, at the Wabash National Center of Liberal Arts. It's actually at the Center of Inquiry at Wabash College, that has been studying students' participation in high-impact practice and a bunch of other aspects of the educational experience, but they've been exploring some specific outcomes that are important to colleges and universities with a small number of institutions across the country. And they've been exploring outcomes like moral development and effective reasoning and problem solving and critical thinking. So outcomes that most universities would say, yeah, that's what we're about. We try and foster and hope to facilitate these sorts of outcomes in students. And they've been identifying, well, what are some of the practices that support the development of these kinds of outcomes? And they've been, spreading different findings, but one of the ones that connects directly with our point today is that enriching experiences like high-impact practices actually have been identified as being strongly associated with the outcomes that I just mentioned. So there's a strong relationship between participation in a high-impact practice and the development of these important outcomes. So there are high-impact practices through both the evidence base that's been long established around many of these practices, but also some more recent work that really tries to get more specifically at college outcomes, have associated these practices with desirable learning outcomes. So that's a positive benefit. The other thing that we're learning is that some features, some practice, some aspects of some of the practices actually have greater benefit than others. So there's some, the study abroad is good for everyone, but there's actually some aspects of it that make it even more beneficial, and it packs a greater punch if there are certain elements in place. And the other thing we're learning, unfortunately, is that we still have some gaps in terms of who can participate in these experiences. So while these experiences are rich, they're still not available for the majority of students in college today. And this is a question I hope you're thinking about as we go through this, is what is the availability of these kind of programs at our institution? So we have lots of positive activities and again, positive evidence around different practices. And I'm going to go through a couple of these practices. And the first one that's coming up is related to first-year seminars. And many of you might have heard about first-year seminars. They're a very popular way of organizing the first-year experience and providing students a really kind of structured, rigorous academic start to their educational experience. So they're associated with persistence, they're associated with providing students a strong foundation in their learning, they're associated with helping students get involved and be more invested on college campuses, and there's really an extensive body of research and resources that are available through a center that's been established now for more than 30 years at the University of South Carolina called the National Resource Center for Students in Transition. So there's a lot of evidence about the value of first-year seminars and what they provide to students. But I want to highlight a couple features as you think about different practices that you're considering for the institution, is that we know that actually working in instructional teams where there's a faculty member and an advisor and perhaps a peer mentor or someone from the library or some student life staff who are involved in first-year seminars, that make that experience even more beneficial for students. We also know that, no surprise here, that when you use engaging sorts of pedagogies, that it actually, particularly forms of active learning, that's what makes the seminar most beneficial. And then finally, seminars that emphasize academic content and that are not simply an introduction to university life are really the ones that provide the most educational benefit for students. So there's some evidence about the value of different aspects of first-year seminars. Another high-impact practice. The next one is about service learning. And I want to highlight this one because it's probably one that I've enjoyed the most in all of the high-impact practices. But service learning has been associated with lots of gains in moral reasoning and very specific development around engagement with diversity and intercultural understanding. Service learning is a very important pedagogical tool to advance specific outcomes. The other thing, it helps certainly increase, no surprise here, students' commitment to the welfare of others and thinking about what it means to be an effective citizen. So there's some citizenship goals that service learning helps advance. And then finally, it also provides an important occasion for students to apply real-world knowledge and apply their skills to a real situation. So service learning has lots of benefits. But it also, there are aspects of service learning experiences that make them even more beneficial. And that's when there are opportunities for structured reflection built into service learning. That it's not just about the experience itself, but about opportunities to reflect. That there's also a very strong connection between course material and what's going on in the service learning experience. And when there's an intense sense of collaboration between and among the site, faculty, and students in the experience as a whole and what that's going to look like and the learning gains from it. Service learning is positively associated with deep learning and personal development. However, there are some equity gaps in terms of who gets to experience service learning. Fewer males participate in service learning. More students who are in education and business than in other fields participate in service learning. And again, one of the most beneficial aspects of service learning is when it's part of a community-based project. Another high-impact practice. I'm going to give you a nice sampling here so you can think about all of these aspects. Another high-impact practice are learning communities. Learning communities, there's a lot of associated benefits. I'm not going to go through the long list here, but know that they are really a well-studied high-impact practice in terms of the benefits that they provide to students and to faculty. There are certain aspects, though, of learning communities that really seem to, again, pack a greater punch, and that it's when there are very intentional links made between the courses in a learning community that is of 2 or 3 courses that are connected, when the links are intentional, not just 2 or 3 courses that students are co-enrolled in. That has some benefit, but the educational benefits come when there's some intentional linkages built around those courses, or when they're linked to courses that have traditionally high failure rates or are considered, in student vernacular, kind of weed out courses. When they're connected in that way, or when there's an instructional team, again, around a particular course or learning community, there's even more beneficial. When there's some investment in faculty development, that this isn't something that we want to just treat like any other course that you teach, we actually want to make sure that you're maximizing all the potential of learning communities. And then, of course, engaging in really engaging pedagogies in this course. And the other aspect that we learned is really important is emphasizing an integrated experience as part of the learning community. When learning community programs emphasize an integrated experience across the courses that might bridge biology and English or chemistry and psychology, when there's some element of it that integrates, whether it's an experience or an assignment or a project, that's when learning communities really take hold and advance deep learning in ways that we might hope for learning communities. So learning communities, another effective practice. I feel like we've really addressed all of the extensive benefits of study abroad in the Global Initiatives presentation, but I want to highlight one that Laura actually mentioned, is that what we've learned about the value of study abroad experiences is that the length of time matters less in the learning gains from a study abroad experience. Now, I will put the one caveat, language acquisition is not increased by a short-term study abroad experience, but other benefits such as students' sense of reflecting on diverse others, students' sense of who and where they are in the world, and some other important personal learning gains can be equally enriched by a short-term study abroad experience. And it provides great exposure to students. That's critically important. However, we know there are some students that don't get to participate in these practices, namely first-generation students. Those who are the first in their family to go to college are much less likely to participate in study abroad experiences than other students. So study abroad is an incredibly beneficial experience. The second to last high-impact practice I want to mention is undergraduate research, another practice that it seems like it has some place in certain aspects of the curriculum at many institutions. However, the goal of undergraduate research is really to make it a little bit more widespread, to see what role it might have in arts, in humanities, and in English, in places that we don't always think about undergraduate research. It is connected with many educational benefits, including increasing students' likelihood of going to graduate school, helping students get and form greater relationships with faculty, that it helps them with some very specific problem solving and reasoning skills and research skills, and has some specific benefits for students who are underrepresented in college, and helps those students, first generation again, students of color, students in underrepresented fields, really overcome some traditional barriers in the educational program. Again, there are different features about undergraduate research that convey different benefits. Overall, undergraduate research is dependent on a meaningful student-faculty interaction. That mentoring that goes on from faculty is critically important for a successful undergraduate research experience. That when we scaffold the research skills, so students come into undergraduate research experience with some sense of, I know how to do this, it certainly helps build and enrich their experience. That there are certain aspects of the undergraduate research experience that have greater benefits, like engaging students in the interpretation and presentation of findings rather than simple data collection, really advances their deep learning skills much more quickly. That when we celebrate and take the occasion to honor students' work in some form of symposium or campus presentation, that actually helps solidify a lot of those benefits and expose students to one another and their experiences in ways that are mutually beneficial. So the last piece I want to highlight is the high-impact practices. The last two, actually, the last two are about kind of more upper division experience, and the one is one that is popular here already or available here for many of your students, and that's a capstone experience. Senior capstone experiences have many benefits, not only in fostering the sense of coherence in an educational program, and also for what they afford students in terms of preparing them for a transition from college to whatever is next in their life. But it also provides students a way to bring together everything they've learned in a particular major or program or throughout their educational experience into some meaningful product, that all conveys specific benefits. However, there are aspects of a culminating experience, again, that convey different benefits. And I'm going to just highlight one here, is the value of projects that are both applied and that require students to invest a great deal of time working with a faculty member on the development of that project. So senior projects, a lot of benefits associated with senior projects. The last one is internships. I'm just going to highlight that quickly. Most of us recognize the value of internships and providing students some real-world experience, but when they're linked and connected to the curriculum in ways that provide students opportunities to reflect intentionally on that experience, that too provides greater benefit. So I just went through a series of high-impact practices that are pretty structured, might say, well, how in the world can I do something like that in my own class? I can't just go pop out a bunch of internships or create a learning community all on my own. Yes, these are institution-wide initiatives, but they of course require faculty and staff to be behind them. But there are actually some more everyday high-impact practices that I want to introduce you to as well. And actually, these are on the handout that you were provided when you entered this room today. And I want to highlight just a series of practices that have been identified as having some important educational benefits. And I want to mention these benefits because they seem to have a differential impact on students. When we think about effective educational practices, they generally benefit all students. So, everybody benefits by engaging educational practices. However, some students actually benefit more from practices that are really considered everyday educational practices. Things like providing opportunities for students to ask questions in class and to give presentations and to work with their peers in and outside of class. These are rather regular kinds of engaging pedagogies. Nothing really all that unusual about some of these high-impact practices. However, what we've learned in our research is that when students report doing these rather everyday high-impact practices and they experience a high-impact structural experience, that certain portions of the student population actually benefit even more. And these are groups of underrepresented students, both students of color, students who are the first in their family to go to college, and also students who enter the college with a slightly lower undergraduate GPA or entering board score. Now, I did listen to the statistics and hear that you have a very talented class of students coming in, so perhaps you don't have as many of these students, but I bet there are some here who would really stand to benefit from having these kinds of experiences at greater levels. So what we have ended up calling this practice, or these practices and their benefit, is that they actually convey a compensatory benefit to students. They tend to help students compensate for what might be considered a less advantaged background. So these practices are really important for us to attend to because they do convey benefits more so to students that enter an institution who might be slightly underprepared for college. So there's some really important benefits in these practices that I just wanted to highlight. So that's the important question that I hope you're asking as you reviewed this list of 14 or so high-impact pedagogical practices. To what extent am I ensuring that students in my class, in my program, in my department are aware of the importance of these practices, and how much will they get to do them? How available are they to our students? Well, you know, there are a lot of practices I just mentioned are highly structured, and then the regular kind of traditional high-impact practices that see more every day. But what is it really about these practices that make them so magical? You know, it's not just having them, it's what they really embody that's important. And what I want to suggest is, you know, what is the magic behind these? Well, it's probably no surprise that these practices are structured in a way that they afford students an opportunity to invest time and effort in content, in academic-oriented material and experiences that really provide some intense academic experiences. They also provide students an occasion to interact with faculty and peers around substantive matters. They also provide students an occasion to experience diversity, which has tremendous educational benefits. They also provide students opportunities to get feedback around their performance and to perhaps make adjustments in their performance as they go. And then finally, they provide students additional opportunities to really apply and think about their learning in terms of real-world context. So it's not so much just having a learning community experience, but it's about what the experience embodies and allows students to do. And these are the secrets behind what makes these practices so magical, is because they're organized in a way to maximize these kinds of practices. So again, the question to all of you, if we were to reflect on what this means, is to think about, well, in what ways can you enhance time on purposeful tasks in your course, in your program? In what ways can you add meaningful interaction around educational experiences, both between faculty and students and among students in your course? How can you increase opportunities for diversity? How might you increase the frequency of feedback, early feedback for your students, particularly if you're teaching in the first year, or add a real-world component, or increase opportunities for students to reflect on what they're learning? So all of these approaches embody those things, and I think there's something for us to think about. So as Laura mentioned, I am going to highlight some of the educational practices at Roger Williams, just to, again, get you thinking and root some of this work into actual practice here. So what I want to do is share a little bit about high-impact practices. First, the general conclusion is, do all students get to participate in high-impact practices? No, there's a real shortage of available practices and students who participate in them. So we're not anywhere near having sufficient numbers of students in these experiences to declare victory and say, great, we've got these firmly entrenched in our educational program, all students are experiencing them, terrific, we can check this off the list. The story is not that rosy, and we still have a lot of work to do, including here. So let me highlight a couple of data points for you. So in NSSE, we asked students about their experience and their expectations for participating in high-impact practices. So this, an abbreviated table, I could give you all of the statistics on this. In the NSSE 2010 cohort, you can see that, for a lot of these practices, there are some pretty low numbers of participation, or percents of participation. So in terms of students who get to experience undergraduate research or research with faculty, we're only touching about 19% of students overall in higher education on this practice. Study abroad, about 18%. So still some pretty small portions of students who are having these experiences. And let me share a quick data point with you for Roger Williams University. NSSE asks students when they're coming into college at the end of their first semester, or really at the end of their second semester, the end of their first year in college, what they expect to do. And this is an interesting gauge or indicator of what students are thinking about in terms of effective educational practice. And in this regard, your students, in this case, were asked how many plan to do this. About 37% indicate an interest in participating in undergraduate research. 66% are planning to do internships, and 60% are thinking about study abroad. Those are actually pretty high proportions. And when you think about that in relation to, well, it's not a direct comparison to the percent of students who actually end up doing these experiences by the time they're seniors, we can realize that there's some potentially unmet need here. So there's greater interest usually, and this is probably not surprising, than there is the actual opportunity for students to do these things. So let me put a little finer point here. So what happens at Roger Williams then? So what is the percent of senior students who actually do these practices? So you saw there, you had some pretty high percentages around practices, 60% of students who want to do these things. Well, what happens by the time they're seniors? How much of that really gets actualized? Well, in 2009, these are some of your results, and I just picked a few practices. So learning communities enjoy, about 41% of students get to do some sort of learning community while they're here. It's about 44% at the comparable New England private institutions, so if you're looking for some comparison to see how you're doing. Undergraduate research, a little higher than at other New England private institutions, a little higher in terms of study abroad. This one is actually pretty significant. So it's, given the presentation that I saw here, I did not know that presentation was going to be so robust and full of experiences, but this result that 31% of the seniors in this case reported having done a study abroad experience is now not surprising to me, given what you've done over the years in terms of international experiences. Internships, a little less. So these are just some quick indicators of the availability and the use of high-impact practices at Roger Williams. So overall, a pretty good picture, certainly very strong in terms of study abroad, but I would argue if that's a real distinctive aspect of your mission, might that even be higher, given its availability and popularity among faculty and staff here. Last year, as with our data, we decided that it might be interesting to think a little bit more about what's distinctive in certain majors. Perhaps there's some patterns associated with high-impact practices that might reveal some departmental or subject matter or disciplinary influence. So we graphed out just kind of the most popular majors and identified, well, where do we see internships practiced more often? Where do we see study abroad? And I'm just teasing you with this little litmus-like example here of where practices occur in 4 of the largest majors across the country. This is not your data. These are actually national data around these, but the 4 largest enrollment majors are English, biology, business, and psychology. And we can kind of see where high-impact practices fall. And you can actually do this with your own data, and when we met with the deans yesterday, talked a little bit about what this might look like it's certainly something you can go back and just ask faculty, what do you think in terms of high impact practices we emphasize most in our department or make most available to our students? Would be a very interesting question, is to do that inventory within your own department to see how available these are. We do see some national patterns actually in high impact practices, some that resonate very strongly with core pedagogies and practices in disciplines. And I think it's a very interesting question to ask, well, exactly what is the right mix given our discipline, given our field, the demands of our field? What would really help our students? What practices might benefit them the most? So an interesting question, and just to tease you a little bit in terms of thinking of what this might look like, I just did a quick little graph here of your largest majors, all of which, if those of you who are really looking at this carefully, see that the N, the sample size, is way too small to make any real statistical decisions about this. But it would be fun to do this. Okay, I said it would be fun. That says a lot about my nerdiness. I think it would be great fun to actually graph all of your majors and perhaps build the N a little bit here on some of these by combining years to see, well, where do our students fall out across these practices? What experiences are they having around these practices? So some interesting questions. You also have some data about what your faculty think about these high impact practices. In 2009, you actually completed the faculty survey of student engagement, or at least I know a good portion of you completed this. If you're new, you did not do this, but if you were here in 2009, you were invited to participate in the faculty survey of student engagement, a companion to NSSE that asked faculty about their perceptions of engagement and the extent to which students are having educational practices and the extent to which faculty think some educational practices are important. And I'll share with you just the results. This is the tally from your impressions of what's important and what you'd like your students to experience. And the percent of faculty here who say that capstone experiences are very important or important is pretty high, 84%. It's hard to get that kind of agreement among faculty. You're a usually fairly disagreeable bunch. 84% of you think that this is important or very important. 80% think internships is important for students to experience. This one might be something to look at. Is there more that you could be doing around internships given the level of importance you attach to it? Is there more that could go on? Is there some room here? Community service, another fairly high one, but not as much agreement on this one perhaps as others. So this is just a little flavor of what's important to faculty and what are students doing. A very interesting match to do. Are students having the kind of experiences that faculty think are important? And I think this leads you naturally to a series of questions. What high impact practices are Roger Williams University students doing? What are they most likely to experience? Why? Why is that? It's because you emphasize it? Is it because it's part of a major? Is it embedded in a program? Are there other practices that you'd like to see greater use in terms of educational experiences here? What might you do around some of these practices? Well, we decided that we would offer a prescription to institutions that were thinking about high impact practices, and we suggest that every institution think about, is there a way to ensure that a high impact practice, one of these structural experiences, is available to all students early in their academic program, and then that there's one later in the major to perhaps cap off the experience. So if we could ensure that, if we could fulfill just this prescription, I think we would see a demonstrable difference in terms of student learning gains, in persistence and graduation rates. So that's the prescription. Well, you have to think about what works for your institution. But there's no secret that when institutions think about practices that matter, and when faculty members are utilizing effective educational practices, students are more likely to be engaged. I know this is a very hard concept to grasp, that when faculty use effective practices, students are more likely to experience them, so I want to repeat that. There's a very close association here with faculty practice and student behaviors that we actually see incredible benefit. So this is really important. So as you're thinking about the start of the semester, there are a couple things I'd like to suggest. One is make plain to students the experiences that matter. Make sure students are aware of the value of these kinds of practices and they understand the rationale behind working with their peers on group projects, and they understand the educational benefits of talking with faculty outside of class about educational matters. make sure that you're keeping students aware of these practices, and that you create the magic of high-impact practices, those skills and experiences that are part of those experiences, a part of more students' opportunities. So be intentional about structuring high-impact practices and think about assessing the outcomes. Think about introducing high-impact practices to students early and try and debunk some of the myths that are associated with, oh, the high cost of study abroad, or the fact that I can't do that because I'm in a certain major and my major is too tight for me to experience service learning. But think about how to make those experiences available for students. The more natural way to do this is to embed them in curriculum to ensure they're part of requirements that all students experience. Another is to try and identify ways for students to experience mini high-impact practices, perhaps an undergraduate research experience that's part of an established course, or a short-term study abroad, a course that includes a 2-week study abroad over spring break, that all of those kinds of experiences of embedding high-impact practices and existing experiences really is beneficial. So the most important lesson from all this is that we need to be intentional about ways to expose students and structure in high-impact practices. And with that, I will conclude and thank you for your attention to this important matter, and really wish you the best in thinking about the high-impact practices that you'll afford all Roger Williams students this year. So thank you very much.